Upon his return to Spahn Ranch, following the joint arrest, Manson was livid and let everyone know who he thought was to blame: Shorty Shea. His dislike of the ranch hand was already well known. He would bring it up in conversation around dinner, Steve Grogan recounted at his 1981 parole hearing. Over a period, it grew worse until we were raided by the police, where everything we had was taken, all our tools and cars and all the possessions that we had accumulated, and plus the children were taken too. Everybody was arrested on the ranch. In fact, the only person who was left was George Spahn, and he was blind. We spent 3 days in jail and we were released. We didn't get back none of our property. The pink slips were confiscated along with our property to 4 or 5 dune buggies that we couldn't get back from them. The children were put into foster homes. What it really did was make everybody really upset at this guy, because I was led to believe that he was doing it to get us evicted off the ranch, to get us thrown off the ranch. That was the only place we had to stay at the time. In July, Shea eloped with Vegas stripper Magdalene Velma Stokes. 25-year-old Stokes, originally from Mississippi, was black, and many people think this incited Manson's rage against Shorty. Rumors are that some of her black friends showed up at Spahn Ranch after the wedding. In summer 1969, after the shooting of Bernard Crowe, this was a very suspect thing. The marriage to Magdalene was short-lived, only a few weeks. Stokes Shea later testified that she last saw her husband on August 16th, the day of the raid, when they separated. They had quarreled over his inability to find work. That evening, he called her from the ranch and said he was going to stay there for a while. He said if she needed to reach him, to call his friends the Babcocks. The next day, Magdalene noted that Shorty's suitcases and a footlocker had been removed from the hotel where they had been staying together. Between August 27th and September 1st, when she had not heard from her estranged husband, Mrs. Shea called the Babcocks at least 3 times and then Spahn Ranch, trying to find Shorty. A woman answered the ranch phone each time. Once, the woman told Magdalene that Shorty went to San Francisco. Shorty had previously worked for a San Francisco company, but not that summer. He was trying to get acting work. A coworker from the Bay Area later testified that he spoke to Shea sometime in August and he'd asked to borrow money. His friend remembers Shorty sounding nervous, even afraid. The friend drove down to the ranch a few weeks later, but Shorty was nowhere to be found. The week before the raid, Frank Retz saw Charlie throw a knife at Shea, with the knife tip hitting a door right in front of where Shorty had been walking. Retz was scared. He told Spahn he wanted to hire guards. George suggested Shea, and Retz met with the stuntman. It was the last time Frank saw Shorty. Barbara Hoyt testified in various hearings over the past 5 decades about the events she witnessed related to the murder of Shorty Shea. She said Charlie claimed Shea was a police informant, how Manson told everyone that Retz was trying to get them kicked off the ranch, which was true, and Manson was getting info from Squeaky about anyone who tried to interfere with the family through Spahn. Shea was topmost on his list. Retz arranged to purchase more land from Spahn, approximately half of the property according to reports, following the August raid, and when the family was released on August 18th and returned to the ranch, Johnny Swartz told Charlie that Shorty had been hired by Retz as a night watchman. The next day, Manson was arrested for pot possession. He was convinced that this was part of a larger campaign plotted by Frank Retz but orchestrated by Shorty Shea to get the family off the property. On August 26th, the day after Manson returned to Spahn Ranch, Shorty flagged Ruby Pearl down as she was driving up in her car. It was morning. He asked Ruby if he could stay at her house that night. She noted that he seemed anxious. She told him that there was no place in her house to stay, but he could sleep in a shed near her house. He declined that offer. Pearl testified that, as she continued driving, she saw another car suddenly appear, and several members of the family stepped out of the vehicle. They included Manson, Tex Watson, Steve Grogan, and Bruce Davis. She watched as they approached Shorty, but she kept driving. Charlie told his followers that Shorty brought down the law and jeopardized their ability to stay in Chatsworth. Again, I will revert back to the language of the killers. I was pissed. Someone at the ranch had to be snitching. The cops hardly knew about the outlaw shacks, much less when I was going to be in one of them. And when Stephanie and I had gone in there, we weren't smoking, and I damn sure didn't have anything on me. When the police lab ran a check on the roach, it wasn't even grass, so whoever had tried to set me up had blown it. We were cut loose. I left the police station feeling I was above ever getting nailed for anything and having it stick. I was chesty about that, but the snitch had to be found and got rid of. After the big raid, I knew that whoever was going to the police knew nothing about the bad shit, and at no time did I think any of the kids in our circle would call the cops. It had to be one of the ranch hands. Juan Flynn was into all of our games. John Swartz enjoyed all the fringe benefits that came his way. My attention then focused on Shorty Shea. Shea was a frustrated movie actor, waiting for his chance to become the next Hop-Along Cassidy. He'd liked us well enough when we first moved in at Spahn's, but in recent months, he'd had a lot of differences with us. Since old George was thinking of selling the ranch, Shorty was kissing a lot of ass with the people who were thinking of buying. He and I already had a confrontation about how much longer we would be there. He told me, "It's all over for you, Charlie, when the new owners take over. They've already told me they don't want you and that gang to be here." I answered by saying, "Shorty, you know what? You got no call to be playing policeman with us. And if you keep on trying to be the fuzz, you'll wish you had minded your own business, instead of sticking your head someplace where it doesn't belong." Walking away from me, he said, "We'll see about that, Charlie. You might tell some of those kids what to do, but not me. I know how to handle you." Leaving the Malibu station for the second time, I had no doubt about Shorty being the snitch. I shared my conclusion with several of the kids. They didn't need convincing, for while I was locked up, Shorty had been bad-mouthing me, telling the kids, "Charlie's bad news. If you stick with him, you're going to end up in jail. Get away from him." If he indeed said this, it seems that Donald Shea was correct. Well, that morning I was awakened by Charles Manson, and still, half asleep, told me to get to the car and handed me like a pipe wrench. Told me to hit Shorty in the back of the head as soon as Tex gave me the go-ahead or gave me the signal. At that point, Tex and I entered the back seat behind Shea, and Tex was on his right-hand side. We proceeded down Santa Susana Pass toward San Fernando Valley, and about a quarter-mile down from the ranch, there was like a turnoff where cars, like rest area, and Tex mentioned that he had some parts over there that he had to pick up before he went to the store. Shorty was driving the vehicle, Tex beside him in the front seat. He was taking us down to an auto mechanic place to change some auto parts in. So actually we were like hitching a ride with him. I was sitting behind the driver. Then we pulled off the road. Tex got out. The car was still in gear. I think he just had his foot on the brake. And they got out and they looked around the bushes like he was looking for some parts. Mr. Shea was driving. Watson tells him, "Pull over." He hesitates. I was supposed to hit this guy in the back of the head. Tex was urging me, "Come on, hit this guy." I kept hesitating. He pulled out a knife that he had. I guess that's what finally, put me over the edge. The assault on Shea began in the car, with Shorty at the wheel. Watson stabs him. He pulls the car over. Grogan hits him in the head. I stayed in the car. I was petrified. I stayed in the car. Manson pulled up in the car behind me. I just hit the guy. The blow stunned him, but it didn't knock him out. And he jumped to the passenger side of the seat. The car door was already open and exited through there. The blow knocked him forward, so he hit the steering wheel and surprised him and jumped out the side. And I had to reach over the seat and get in the driver's seat to stop the car because the way it was parked, there was an embankment, like cul-de-sac ditch. And the car drove into the ditch. So meanwhile, I'm jumping over the seat, trying to put the brakes on, put the car in gear, stop the motor. He'd already been stabbed. I imagine Tex did. I didn't actually see him stab him. My head was turned, He was laying on the ground in semi-conscious state. He was already going or something. And at that point, Manson arrived on the scene with another person. Charlie arrived in a second vehicle with Bill Van Sickle and Larry Giddings. The men got out of their car and approached Watson, Grogan, Davis, and Shea. I was handed a knife and told to stab him, and I stabbed him twice in the chest, and some others were told the same. I look around, and there's Bill Vance, Tex Watson, Steve Grogan with bloody knives, and they'd been through this. It was not until recent parole hearings that Davis named both Van Sickle and Lawrence Giddings, a.k.a. Larry Bailey, as participants. I'm standing there, and he'd been stabbed several times, and Manson handed me a machete, said cut his head off. I couldn't do that. And so he handed me a knife, and he said, well, you better do something. I'll tell you what I did. I took the bayonet. It was about this big. It come off a Mauser rifle. Mr. Shea was at my left. He was bent over. I reached out, and I cut him right across the shoulder. I cut him with this knife. I cut Mr. Shea with an upward stroke, cut him on his right side, shoulder, somewhere between his armpit and his clavicle, right here. And I looked around as if, I hope you're happy, threw down the knife and left. And that was a shock. Boy, this knife was sharp. It laid him open. I don't know if he was dead or not. He might have slashed him. I don't recall if he stabbed him. I wish I could say, yeah, I was mad at Shorty and we was going to kill him because he was a snitch and blah, blah, blah. That's not true. I didn't have personal animosity against him. I discounted his life. I will tell you that. I thought my life was worth more than his at that point. A couple minutes after that, he was dead, and I was told to take him, drag him into some bushes that were further from the highway, cover him up till night, come back at night and bury him. And the others left, so I came back at night and buried him. Barbara Hoyt claimed that in late August, she heard someone screaming down near one of the creeks on the ranch. She swore that the screams were from Shorty Shea. She said, I was in a trailer on high ground, and below that was a creek bed. Charlie, Tex, Bruce Davis, and Steve Grogan chased Shorty down there. It was around 10 at night. I heard her scream and got up. The moon was bright, and I could see the imprint of leaves on the window screen. I thought maybe I imagined that. I lay back down, and the screams started again. And they kept happening and happening and happening. It was Shorty. I recognized his voice. I was scared. I crouched in a ball on the floor. The statement she made about it being night initially left me in doubt about Barbara's memory. All accounts of Shorty's death place it in the morning, perhaps late morning. It was not until I personally visited Spahn Ranch and walked to the site of Shorty's slaying that I learned that Shorty was dragged into a culvert, not just below bushes, where he lay for hours. He was not dead, but barely alive. At some point that day, he roused enough to scream for help, but help never came. They buried Shorty's body, and of course we held the position we don't even know he's dead. He told me to say that we had mutilated the body. This statement would bring more fear to the people rather than just stab the guy the way we did. Only Grogan and Davis have admitted their roles in the death of Shorty. In Manson's memoir, he related the events that led to Shorty being targeted by the family, but not his specific actions the morning that Shorty was killed. We do not know if Manson stabbed Shea. Watson, Van Sickle, and Giddings were never charged with Shea's murder. The DA, caught up in his theory of helter-skelter and obsessed with making the world believe I was a satanic Pied Piper, overlooked many participants, accessories, and conspirators. Someplace out there in that society he protects so well, he has left several killers to prowl the streets. The story is that nearly every member of the family played a role in tormenting, torturing, killing, burying Donald Jerome Shea, or disposing of evidence. Clem buried the body the first time by the creek near the railroad station. Then the next day, Shorty was dug up by some of the girls and reburied in Simi Valley. They drove his car to Canoga Park, loaded with his belongings. But Bruce left a handprint on the car. He had also been with Manson when Charlie assaulted Hinman with the sword. In fact, Bruce had driven both Bobby and Manson to Hinman's that day. This guaranteed that he would be tried for murder. Barbara Hoyt told Los Angeles Magazine in 2009, "I heard Charlie talking about it. He said, 'Shorty died with a little help from us. He was hard to kill, but we brought him to now.'" Barbara also testified that Bruce said that Shorty was just a fucking pig and a drunk that nobody would miss. Unlike the murders of Hinman, those at Cielo Drive, and the LaBiancas, the murder of Shorty was the only one carried out exclusively by male members of the family, although the women participated in the cover-up. Once again, Manson arranges the killing for his own purposes, Susan Atkins wrote. The main participant is Steve Grogan, who did not get his hands dirty on the night the LaBiancas were killed. That Grogan ends up dragged into murder is important to Manson because Grogan not only knows about Crow, he now knows about the LaBianca killings, and he watched Manson greet those coming back from the Cielo murders. The backup cast, those who either lured Shea out behind the ranch or helped clean up and bury him afterwards, included just about everyone not involved to this point. Catherine Scher, Nancy Pittman, Sandra Good, and Lynette Fromey. It's clear that the killing of Donald Shorty Shea was a hit, ordered by Charles Manson, and intended to determine which of his male followers had what it took to protect the family and to serve him loyally. He needed young, controllable men, like Vietnam vets. Kenneth Richard Brown, a.k.a. Scotty Davis, and John Philip Zero Hott arrived at the ranch in August after the raid. Zero had been a seaman apprentice in the Navy and possibly involved with the Straight Satans. He robbed those gas stations with Bill Van Sickle and Vern Plumley that month. His buddy Brown may have been in the service as well. They were good mechanics, both originally from Ohio, who helped the family convert more VW bugs into dune buggies. Later, some of the dune buggies were sold for cash. But one of those two men wouldn't survive 3 months in the clutches of the Manson family. With multiple arrests in August and now another murder, this one close to home, Charlie knew it was time to get out of Dodge. The longer they remained at Spahn Ranch, the more likely the police would keep harassing them. Eventually, they might figure out that the family was doing more than harboring underage runaways, smoking grass, and stealing VW parts. So on September 1st, the family left Simi Valley to head into the heart of darkness in Death Valley. They thought they were fleeing the coming Armageddon. Instead, they were looking down the barrel of their last weeks of freedom.